I can't feel my legs, sir, but I'll keep working, the settler girl whispered through pain and grit, while the rancher's tears fell, betraying the love he could no longer hide. Will her unyielding spirit heal them both, or break his heart beyond repair? The morning sun bled through the horizon like an ember burning low, touching the ridges of the dry creek plains in a thin, gold line. The wind stirred the tall grass, dry and whispering. Rancher Eli Cartwright swung down from his horse, squinting toward the old fence line that had fallen again. It was another day that looked like the last a life measured in chores, silence, and the hollow echo of boots against dirt. He wasn't expecting to find anyone out there, least of all a girl. She was half buried in the dust beside the fence, skirts torn, one boot missing. Her hands trembled as she tried to move, but it was clear she couldn't. Eli dropped to one knee, brushing away grit from her face. She was young, maybe 20. Her hair the pale color of wheat left too long in the Sunday. Her lips were cracked, her eyes dazed but fierce. "Can you hear me?" Eli asked, voice rough with disuse. Her eyes fluttered. "I can hear you, sir," she whispered, "but I can't feel my legs." The words hit harder than he expected. He swallowed, his throat tightening. Out here, miles from town, words like that were close to a death sentence. "Don't move," he said quietly. "I'll get you help." Her hand shot out, grabbing his wrist with surprising strength. Don't waste time on me. Just leave me. I'll keep working." The way she said it, like she still owed the earth, her labor made something twist inside him. "You're not working another second today," Eli said. "You're coming with me." He wrapped her in his coat, lifting her gently. She winced, but didn't make a sound. As he carried her toward his horse, her head rested weakly against his chest. "Name's Eli," he muttered. "Eli Cartwright. You got a name, miss?" "June," she murmured. "June Marlowe." Her voice had that quiet grit he hadn't heard in years, the sound of someone who'd already faced too much and still refused to break. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun had climbed high. Eli laid her on the cot in the bunkhouse, fetched clean water, and did what little doctoring he knew. She thanked him with a whisper. Then, as he stepped back, she caught his sleeve. "You don't have to pity me, Mr. Cartwright," she said, eyes steady. "I'll find a way to pull my weight. I always do." Eli stood there, unsure whether to admire her or curse the world that made her speak that way. He'd thought his heart had turned to dust long ago, buried with the woman he'd lost. But the sight of June hurt. Proud, unyielding, stirred something faint but living inside him. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain, a rare promise in the plains. Eli looked toward the horizon, jaw tight. This wasn't going to be just another day. If you think that's the hardest thing this girl will endure, wait till you see what she does next. By the time the sun dipped low, June was awake again, staring at the rafters of the bunkhouse. The sound of boots outside, the steady, unhurried tread of Eli Cartwright, was the only sign of life around her. Every inch of her body ached, but worse was the strange stillness in her legs. She tried again, willing them to move. Nothing. Panic rose like a tide, but she swallowed it down. The door creaked open. Eli stepped in, carrying a tin bowl of broth and a folded cloth. His face was carved from quiet resolve, his eyes lined from too many years in the wind. "Thought you might be hungry," he said. June tried to push herself up, but her arms gave way halfway. Eli crossed the room in 2 strides, slipping an arm behind her shoulders. "Easy now. I can feed myself," she muttered, cheeks flushing. He didn't argue, just held the bowl steady as she sipped. The warmth slid down her throat, like forgiveness. For a moment, she felt human again. When she was done, she glanced toward the window. The sky was all purple dusk and drifting dust. "You live out here alone?" she asked. "Been that way for nearly 7 years," he replied. "Used to be me and my brother running this place. He's gone now." June caught the brief flicker in his eyes, loss buried deep. The kind that didn't fade, only settled in quiet corners. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Eli gave a small nod. "Ain't your burden." She wanted to tell him that sorrow didn't have to be carried alone, that she knew something of it too, but she couldn't yet find the words. So instead, she looked down at her hands, raw from the road, and asked, "What'll you have me do here once I'm better?" His jaw flexed. "You focus on getting better. That's the job." Her voice hardened. "I don't take charity." He studied her for a moment, the lamplight catching the stubborn line of her chin. "Then, call it trade," he said quietly. "You heal up, and when you can work, you help around the place. Fair enough?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Fair." He turned to leave, pausing at the doorway. "Storm's comin'. Don't be scared if the walls shake a bit. The wind out here's got a mean way of talkin'." When he was gone, June lay still, listening to the approaching rumble of thunder. She thought of the man silent, stoic, burdened by ghosts, and wondered what kind of heart he hid beneath that weathered shell. Later that night, lightning flared across the sky, and June jolted awake. The bunkhouse walls shuddered. She tried to sit, but her legs refused. Tears stung her eyes, unbidden. Then she heard footsteps, heavy, steady, coming to the door. Eli's voice came through, calm and sure. "You're safe, June. Just the wind talkin'. It'll pass." And for the first time in a long while, she believed it. The next morning broke quiet and gold, the kind of dawn that carried no promises but offered a chance to start again. June Marlowe lay still, staring at the sunlight pooling across the bunkhouse floor. She'd spent most of the night listening to the storm roll through, Eli's voice steadying her from the porch whenever the thunder cracked too close. Now the air was fresh and damp, carrying the faint scent of sage. She pushed herself upright, jaw clenched, determination sparking like flint. The numbness in her legs was the same, but her spirit wasn't. She had work to do somehow. Eli came in carrying a bucket of water, his sleeves rolled up, shirt damp from the morning chores. He stopped short when he saw her sitting up. "You ought to be restin'," he said. "I've done enough of that," June replied. "Need to move. I need to know if I can." Eli set the bucket down, his brow furrowed. "You push too soon, you'll make it worse." She met his gaze with quiet defiance. "Or maybe I'll make it better." He hesitated, then stepped aside. "All right, but I ain't letting you fall." June gripped the edge of the cot and tried to lift herself. Her arms strained, trembling under her own weight. The floor felt impossibly far away. For a second, she almost made it upright until her strength gave out and her knees buckled. Eli caught her before she hit the ground. His hands were rough but steady, his chest solid as a wall behind her. She pressed her lips together, fighting the shame rising in her throat. "I told you," he murmured. She pushed against him weakly. "I don't need your pity." "It ain't pity," he said, voice low. "It's helpful. There's a difference." The words hung between them, heavier than they should have been. Eli eased her back onto the cot, kneeling to check her legs. "You still got the feeling?" She shook her head. "Nothing below the knees, not yet." He nodded slowly, his jaw working. "Then we'll keep tryin', bit by bit." "We?" she asked, surprised. He looked at her then not as a burden, but as someone worth standing beside. Takes two to fix a busted fence. Figure the same goes for people. June blinked back sudden tears, the kind she hadn't let fall in years. She turned her face away, hiding the quiver in her voice. "You don't even know me, Mr. Cartwright." Eli rose, pulling his hat low. "Maybe not, but I reckon I will." When he left, June sat in silence, the echo of his words warming the cold ache inside her. She flexed her toes, nothing. But somewhere deeper, something stirred. Outside, Eli led his horse toward the corral, the morning sun catching the silver in his hair. He didn't look back, but he didn't have to. He knew that girl in his bunkhouse wasn't done fighting. And for the first time in 7 long years, neither was he. Days turned into weeks, and June refused to be still. Each morning, Eli found her sitting by the window, hands busy with something, mending a torn shirt, polishing a bridle, sorting tools she couldn't yet use. The bunkhouse had become her world, but she treated it like a workshop, not a cage. Eli watched her quietly from a distance. He'd offered her comfort, but June had built herself purpose instead. It reminded him of how he used to be before the silence, before loss hardened him. One afternoon, he came in carrying a stack of worn fence rails. "Could use some help patching this old post," he said, setting them down by the door. "But I suppose that'll have to wait." June lifted her chin. "Who says it has to?" He frowned. "You can't stand, June. I don't need to stand to be useful." Her tone was matter-of-fact, not prideful. She motioned for him to bring the rails closer. "If you hand me the nails and line, I can fix what's broken. Same as you." Eli studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, let's see what you can do." For the next few hours, the two worked side by side, Eli outside driving stakes, June seated in the dirt near the fence line, measuring and binding rails with surprising precision. Her hands were steady, movements sharp and deliberate. She used what she had, adapting, inventing small ways to make up for what she'd lost. When the last section was done, Eli stepped back, whistling low. "That's a fine stretch of fence, Miss Marlowe." June brushed dust from her skirt, a faint smile tugging her lips. "Told you I could work." "You did," he said softly. "Didn't think you meant it like this." The pride in his voice caught her off guard. No one had looked at her that way in a long time, not as someone to pity or protect, but as a partner. Later, when the sun sank low, Eli carried her back to the bunkhouse. The sky was painted in gold and violet, the wind warm and alive. June leaned against him, tired but triumphant. "Your brother helped you build all this?" she asked, eyes tracing the wide porch and barns. Eli's steps slowed. "Yeah, he and I did most of it, before the fever took him." "I'm sorry," she said quietly. He nodded once, eyes distant. "Ain't your fault. I just haven't built much since." June's voice was gentle. "Then maybe it's time to start again." That night, Eli found himself lingering at the doorway longer than usual, watching her as she dozed, a faint smile on her face even in sleep. The air in the bunkhouse felt different now, warmer, as if life had crept back in through the cracks. He turned toward the open plains, stars glimmering above the ridge, and let out a long breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Maybe healing didn't come from standing tall, it came from learning to build again. By the next sunrise, the ranch had a new rhythm, quiet, deliberate, and strangely whole. Eli Cartwright still rose before dawn, but now he wasn't alone in the work. June had found her place in the routine. From her seat by the window or the shade of the corral, she mended tack, scrubbed harnesses, and even trained the ranch dogs with a whistle she'd fashioned from scrap metal. It wasn't much movement, but it was life. Eli noticed how her laughter, soft, rare, seemed to travel farther than it should. It carried through the yard like a balm, smoothing the edges of his silence. He hadn't realized how much noise a lonely place could make until she'd arrived to fill it. That morning, as he brought her breakfast, she greeted him with a grin. "You're up before the sun again. Don't you ever rest, Mr. Cartwright?" He shrugged, setting the tray beside her. "Rest don't fix fences." "And fences don't feed hearts," she countered. He froze at that, surprised at the way her words cut right through him. She had a knack for saying things plain and simple and making them stick. After a pause, he said quietly, "You've been teaching the dogs to come to your whistle." June smiled proudly. "They listen better than people." Eli's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "I'll take that as a compliment." But before he could turn away, a sharp cry escaped her lips. June's hand flew to her thigh. She looked down in disbelief. I felt that. Eli dropped to his knees beside her. Where? Here, she whispered, pressing her palm to the spot just above her knee. It hurts. Just for a second. For a long heartbeat they both stared hope, fragile and wild, hanging between them. Then June began to cry, the sound breaking out of her like a spring bursting free after winter. Eli's hand hovered near hers but didn't touch. It means the nerves are waking up, he said softly. You're coming back, June. Her tears turned to laughter. I told you I'd work my way through it. He swallowed hard, a smile tugging his mouth before he could stop it. You sure did. Silence followed, the kind that wasn't empty anymore. He watched her, sunlight catching the loose strands of her hair, her spirit too fierce to stay down. And in that moment, Eli realized something that startled him more than her recovery. He was starting to care. Not the quiet, passing kind. The deep kind that made a man's chest ache. When he stood, his throat tightened around a word he hadn't spoken in years. He wanted to tell her she was brave, that she was changing the air in this lonely place, but the words stuck, as if his voice had forgotten how to carry tenderness. So instead, he just said, "Proud of you." June's eyes met his, shimmering. "That's the best thing anyone's ever said to me." And as he stepped outside into the light, Eli Cartwright finally understood. Some words didn't have to be loud to change everything. The night came slow and silver, the air still carrying a hint of summer warmth. Crickets sang along the fence line, and the ranch lay wrapped in an easy quiet, the kind Eli Cartwright hadn't felt in years. From the bunkhouse window, June could see him out by the corral, lantern in hand, checking the horses before nightfall. She had spent the whole day working her legs, pushing herself a little more each hour. The pain had returned, sharp, electric, but it was the kind of pain that meant life. She could move her knees now, and even if she couldn't yet stand, that small victory filled her chest with fire. When Eli came in, she was seated on the floor near the hearth, sorting through a box of old tools. He raised a brow. "Didn't I tell you to rest?" "You did," she said, brushing dust from her hands. "But I don't take orders too well." He huffed, setting down his hat. "I'm learning that fast." June smiled faintly, then looked past him toward the open doorway. "It's a clear night. You can see the stars falling. Ever watch them?" Eli hesitated. "Used to. Not much reason lately." "Then come on," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You got reason enough now." Minutes later, they sat just outside the bunkhouse, wrapped in blankets against the chill. The sky above was endless, a black sea scattered with silver fire. A meteor streaked by, leaving a trail that seemed to hang forever. June tilted her head back, eyes bright. "When I was little," my ma said, "if you spoke a wish out loud, the stars could hear it." Eli's gaze stayed on the horizon. "I stopped wishing a long time ago." She turned toward him. "Then start again." He didn't answer right away. The wind brushed between them, carrying the scent of grass and rain. Finally he said, "My wife used to talk about nights like this. Said the sky was God's way of reminding us we weren't alone." June's voice softened. "You're not." Something in him cracked at that quiet, invisible, but deep. He hadn't realized how much weight he'd carried, until her words loosened it. "You ever think," he said, "that maybe folks don't come into your life to be saved, but to save you?" June smiled faintly. "Maybe that's the whole reason I ended up in your field." A silence stretched, comfortable this time. June's hand rested on the blanket, close enough that their fingers brushed. Eli didn't pull away. She glanced down, then back at the sky. "You gonna make your wish, Mr. Cartwright?" He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time in years, spoke without hesitation. "Already did." June's heart stilled, her breath catching in her throat. The sky burned bright one last time before settling into stillness. Eli stood slowly, tipping his hat. "Best get you inside before the cold sets in." But as he carried her back, June knew the cold wasn't what she'd remember about that night. It was the warmth in his voice when he said her name. The next morning dawned quiet, too quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as June watched Eli saddle his horse outside. She had grown stronger, her legs still weak, but no longer useless. Every day she'd managed a little more. Standing for seconds, balancing on a crutch Eli had carved from a hickory branch. He'd noticed her progress but said little, just nodded whenever she caught his proud glance. But today, something in him seemed uneasy. "You headin' to town?" she asked, resting against the porch rail. "Supply run," he said, tightening the saddle strap. "Won't be long." June nodded, though she hated the thought of him leaving. "I'll keep the place runnin' while you're gone." He smiled faintly. "I don't doubt that." But Eli never made it past the front gate. A rider appeared over the rise, tall, thin coat, dusted from the road, hat brim low. He rode slowly, deliberate, like a man who already knew his destination. When he stopped in front of the ranch, his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mornin'," he called out. "Fine land you got here." Eli's hand hovered near his hip, a habit he hadn't used in years. "That depends on who's askin'." The man dismounted, dusting off his coat. "Name's Reverend Amos Pike. I'm lookin' for a girl name of June Marlowe." June froze in the doorway. Her fingers clutched the wooden frame so tight her knuckles went white. Eli turned slightly, his tone even. "What's your business with her?" "She ran off from our mission settlement 2 months back," Pike said smoothly. "Belongs under the Lord's protection, not out here with strangers." Eli's jaw tightened. "She's no prisoner here." Pike's smile sharpened. "She's a ward of the church, and I've got papers to prove it." Inside, June's breath came shallow and quick. She remembered that voice, the sermons, the punishments wrapped in prayer, the way he'd call obedience salvation. Her scars weren't all from the road. Eli stepped forward, his voice like gravel. "Ain't no paper that lets a man own another soul. You best ride on." Pike's eyes darkened. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Cartwright. That girl's trouble. Always has been." June's voice rang out, trembling but fierce. "You don't get to speak for me anymore." Both men turned. She stood in the doorway, bracing on her crutch, her face pale but steady. "I'm not your ward, I'm not your charity," she said. "I'm free." Eli's heart swelled with a pride he hadn't felt in years. He stepped beside her, not in front of her. "You heard the lady." For a long moment, Pike's gaze shifted between them, calculating, cold. Then he tipped his hat. "You'll regret this, Cartwright." The preacher rode off, but not before glancing back once, his eyes promising a return. As the dust settled, June exhaled shakily. "He'll be back." Eli nodded, voice quiet but certain. "Then he'll find out this place doesn't scare easily." Night came fast that day, the sky bruised with purple clouds as if the world itself held its breath. Eli built a fire in the hearth. Though the air wasn't cold, he needed something steady, something to hold on to. June sat nearby, her crutch leaning against the chair, her hands clasped tight in her lap. The preacher's visit had shaken her to her bones, though she tried to hide it behind calm eyes. Eli studied her in silence, the firelight drawing gold from her hair. "You knew that man," he said finally. June nodded, her voice low. "I did, too well." He waited, not pushing, just letting the crackle of the flames fill the space between them until she found her words. "I was 12 when my pa died," she began. "Ma and I were taken in by Reverend Pike's settlement. He said he'd feed us, keep us safe if we worked the fields and prayed proper. For a while, I believed him. But the Lord he preached wasn't mercy, it was fear. If you spoke out of turn, you were punished. If you asked questions, you were called wicked." Her voice faltered. Eli's hands tightened on his knees, rage simmering low and steady. "When Ma fell ill," June continued, "he said her sickness was judgment. I begged him to get help, but he said medicine was for the faithless. She died that winter. June's eyes shone wet in the firelight. After that, I stopped believing in his kind of God. Eli's chest ached at her words. So you ran. I had to, she said. He wanted to marry me off to one of his elders to keep me under protection, he called it. I took a wagon at night and rode until the wheel broke. That's how you found me, out by your fence. The memory cut through him like wind, through an open door. She hadn't been lost, she'd been escaping a cage. Eli leaned forward, voice rough. You ain't going back, not while I'm breathing. June gave a small, broken laugh. He won't stop, Eli. He thinks I'm his responsibility. He'll bring others next time. Then we'll be ready, he said simply. You ain't alone in this anymore. The words hit her like a promise she'd never dared to hope for. Her shoulders eased, the tremor in her hands stilling. She looked at him through the glow of the fire, this man who barely spoke, who lived half his life in shadow, now burning with something fierce and protective. You lost someone too, she whispered. That's why you understand. Eli met her gaze. My wife. Fever took her same year my brother died. I stopped talking after that. Figured words didn't fix much. June's eyes softened. Maybe not, but they heal more than silence ever did. He smiled then, small but real. The first she'd ever seen from him. Outside, the wind shifted, brushing the flames sideways like a breath of life. Inside, two broken souls sat, in its warmth no longer hiding from the past, but beginning to build something from its ashes. The next morning it broke under a heavy sky. Clouds hung low over the hills, gray and thick, pressing down on the ranch like a warning. June woke to the sound of hooves, too many to belong to Eli alone. She pushed herself upright, the pain in her legs still present but not stopping her. Through the window, she saw them, 4 riders approaching, their silhouettes dark against the dawn. At the front rode Reverend Pike, his coat snapping in the wind like a banner of judgment. Eli stood in the yard, hat low, hands calm but ready. He didn't reach for the rifle slung by the post. Not yet. June knew that look on his face. It wasn't fear. It was restraint. The kind that only came from a man who'd seen what violence could cost. Morning, Mr. Cartwright, Pike called out, voice slick as oil. I told you I'd be back. Eli's gaze was cold steel. Didn't say I doubted it. Behind Pike, 2 men dismounted lawmen by their badges, their expressions stiff and unreadable. The third stayed on horseback, rifle slung loose. This here's Sheriff Braddock, Pike said, gesturing with false grace. I've filed a claim for the return of Miss June Marlowe, a ward of the church and the state. I'm here to take her into custody. June stepped out of the bunkhouse before Eli could stop her. The crutch thudded softly against the porch boards. You'll have to drag me, she said. Her voice trembled, but it carried. Pike's smile widened. Defiance looks pretty on you, child. But the law protects the free, Eli cut in. She's not your ward. She's a woman, and she's made her choice. The sheriff's brow furrowed. Is this true, miss? You stayin' here of your own will? Yes, June said firmly. This is my home now. Braddock looked between them, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. Pike stepped closer, voice rising with false righteousness. She's been corrupted, Sheriff. Look at her living in sin, crippled and led astray by a godless man. Eli's hand clenched into a fist, but he didn't move. June straightened as best she could, her face pale but defiant. You talk about God, she said, but you never knew him. The Lord I remember doesn't cage people. He sets them free. The words landed like thunder. Even the sheriff seemed taken aback. Eli finally spoke, his voice quiet but unyielding. Reverend, you're trespassing on my land. You'll turn around and ride out, or I'll have you removed. Pike sneered. By who? You? By me, came a voice from behind. It was Sheriff Braddock, his tone now firm. I've heard enough. The girl stays. You're done here, preacher. For a moment, Pike looked ready to strike. Then, seeing no support, he spat into the dust and swung onto his horse. "This ain't over," he hissed. Eli watched until the riders vanished beyond the ridge. Then he turned to June. "You all right?" She nodded, eyes glistening. "He's gone. For now," Eli said softly. "But you stood tall, June. Proud." Her hand found his, trembling but sure. "So did you." And as the clouds broke above them, a shaft of sunlight spilled across the land, like a promise that freedom, once claimed, would never be taken again. Weeks passed, and the ranch slowly returned to its rhythm, steady, alive, and full of quiet laughter. The winter storms had rolled away, leaving the plains washed clean, the air smelling of cedar and new grass. The world seemed softer somehow, as if it too had decided to start again. June stood on the porch that morning, stood without crutches. Her legs still trembled, but she didn't fall. Eli was by the corral, feeding the horses. When he turned and saw her, he froze, hay still in his hands. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then June took one shaky step forward, then another. She laughed, tears bright in her eyes. "Look at me, Eli. I'm standing." He dropped the hay and came toward her, the look on his face part awe, part disbelief. "You sure are," he said softly. "Stronger than anyone I ever met." June leaned against the railing, her breath uneven but joyful. "I told you I'd work through it. Guess I just needed a reason." Eli's eyes met hers, steady and full. "You are the reason, June." For a long moment, they just stood there, two souls who had known too much pain, finding peace in the simple act of standing side by side. The town soon learned what had happened between them and the preacher. Word spread about how Eli Cartwright had stood his ground for a broken girl who wouldn't stay broken. The sheriff came by one afternoon with a small smile and a letter official notice that June Marlowe was free of any claim or guardianship. June held the paper like it was gold. "Free," she whispered, "for the first time in my life." Eli nodded, pride and tenderness flickering in his eyes. "Always were, far as I could see." That night, they built a fire outside beneath the stars. The same stars that had watched over their first wish now burned brighter, like they knew the ending of the story they'd helped begin. Eli brought out an old guitar, its strings dusty, its sound rough, and strummed a simple tune. June listened, smiling. "Didn't know you played." He chuckled softly. "Ain't much to hear. Used to play for my wife, before I forgot how to feel." She looked at him, voice gentle. "Maybe you just needed someone to remind you what music sounds like." He met her gaze, something deep and certain in his eyes. "You reminded me of a lot of things, June." The wind picked up, tugging at her hair. Without thinking, Eli reached out, brushing a stray lock behind her ear. She didn't pull away. When he leaned in, the world seemed to still the crickets, the fire, even the wind holding its breath. Their lips met softly, a promise sealed not in passion, but in peace. When they finally pulled apart, Eli whispered, "You changed this place." June smiled through tears. "No, Eli. You did. You just needed someone to believe it was worth saving." The fire cracked, throwing sparks into the dark, and the wind carried her name across the plains. June Marlowe. The girl couldn't feel her legs, but taught a rancher how to feel again. If you've ever doubted the power of love to rebuild what life tried to break, don't miss what comes next.